Hello, my wonderful students. I welcome you to today's class. Our topic for today is Introduction to Poetry. Introduction to Poetry. But before we begin, what are the objectives of this lesson? What are the things that are expected of you as a student to take home by the end of this lesson? By the end of this lesson, it is expected that you should be able to define poetry. Also, you should be able to explain the various elements of poetry and discuss robustly the types of poetry. So you must take note of these various objectives, definition, elements, and types. So let's go to the meaning of poetry. What is poetry? What does poetry mean? Scholars have defined poetry as the extraordinary perception of the ordinary. So poetry has a way of showing or portraying an ordinary thing in an extraordinary way. Again, let's look at the etymological meaning of poetry. That is the root meaning. Poetry is from the Greek word ponio, which means I create. So, poetry is the art of creative writing. It is the art of writing a poem. Poetry is also a way of expressing our emotions and feelings in a way that is different from the ordinary usage of words. When you express your feelings and your emotions in a way that is different from the everyday usage of words, which means that in poetry, you must use a tightened language. You must use words in an intense manner to portray and pass your message so that people can feel and share from your emotions and feelings. Have you known the meaning of poetry? That in poetry you must write in an intense way, a way that is different from the everyday usage of words. How do we now know one who writes a poem? That is, what is or who is a poet? Who is a poet? A poet is anybody or any person that writes a poem. So a writer of a poem is a poet. And again, you must take note that poems, or if you like poetry, is different from every other genre of literature. In that, poems are usually written in verse and stanza. Remember, drama is different from poetry because drama is written in art and scenes, while prose is written in paragraphs and chapters. Poems are usually written in verse and stanza. Have you known the meaning of poetry and who a poet is, that is a writer of a poem, let's look at the elements of poetry. What are the elements of poetry? The elements of poetry include 1. Imagery. Of course, you should know that imagery is the meta picture that a work of art evokes in reader's mind. Is the meta picture that a work of art evokes in the mind of the reader. Also, another element of poetry is reading. Of course, reading is a regular repeated pattern of sounds or movements. It is a regular repeated pattern of sound or movement. Again, we also have sound. It is through sound that we can change a poem into a song because of the sound in it. So poems, most often than not, most poems can be turned into a song because of the way it is written with its end rhymes and other features of poetry. So having looked at the elements of poetry, what are the various types of poetry? What are the types of poetry? So let's look at types of poetry. There are so many types of poetry, we can't exhaust them. Some of them include elegy. Elegy is a poem that expresses sadness for a dead person. So a poem that you write dedicated to a dead person is called elegy. Another one is dirge. A dirge is a poem of lamentation. Normally, dirges are usually shorter than elegies. It's a poem to mourn the dead. Again, we also have another type of poetry, dramatic poetry. Dramatic poetry uses characters, dialogue, and actions. It is written as if it's a drama. Within the poetry, people's dialogue, that is, the poetic personnel dialogue. Another type of poetry is ode. Ode is usually an address to persons, objects, or things. It could be a meditative address to a person. It could be to an object or to an abstract noun. For instance, an example of ode is John Keats' Ode to a Nightingale, which he wrote to appreciate and eulogize a lady whose voice he describes as that of a nightingale, a bird. So ode are usually meditative address to people, objects, or abstract noun. So what are other types of poetry? There are still so many other types. We cannot exhaust them. There are so many. We have other types like epic. Epic help to tell a story of an heroic deed. Take for instance, when someone does something that is heroic, kills a lion. When you write a poem in praise of such a person, such a poem is called epic. We also have lyrics. It's a short musical poem. Also, we have another poem, ballads. Ballads are poems that tell stories. They are poems that tell stories. They are poems that usually sung to tell stories. Again, we have pastoral poems. Pastoral poems are poems that talks about rural areas. It's all about rural settings, centers on rural settings. It could be poems that describes how a shepherd takes sheep to greener pasture. Any poem that is centered around rural setting is a pastoral poem. Another type of poem is sonnet. A sonnet is a poem of 14 lines. And most often than not, for instance, with Shakespeare's sonnet is usually 4-4-4-2. Poems are usually 14 lines. 4-4-4-2. We have other types of poetry. Other types of poetry include poems like Idyll. They are short, idealized poems about simple life. When a poem is about a simple life, it is Idyll. Also, another poem is didactic poem. And this type of poem teach moral lessons. Any poem that teaches morals is called what? Didactic poem. Also, we have humorous poem. They are poems that make readers to laugh. They are poems that has humor. It's just to make one to laugh. We also have panegyric. Is a poem that energizes somebody, that praises somebody, maybe for one thing or the other that the person has done. It praises somebody. We also have epitaph. Epitaph is an inscription on a tomb. It's a poem that is usually inscribed on the tomb of a dead person. Again, we have another type of poem, hagiology. This poem describes the life of a saint, how a saint lived a godly lifestyle, a lifestyle that is worthy of emulation, a lifestyle that is untainted, a lifestyle that one should take a cue from. So, hagiology usually describes lifestyle or the life of a saint. Having looked at the meaning of poetry, the various types and elements of poetry, in our next class, we shall be looking at words associated with poetry. Words associated with poetry. It is nice and wonderful having you. Thank you very much.